Hello everyone. So as you can see, this is our 11th lecture as a part of our prelims revision series. This is a continuation of the 8th lecture. 8th lecture was related to defense related developments, and in the 8th lecture we have discussed about all news regarding combat aircraft technology and its latest developments. So for those who are new to this particular video, I really request you to go and have a glimpse at the 8th lecture. Right, because that is where I would have discussed about the basics of India's security needs and all the present innovations and developments that's happening in the realm of defense. All of it has a certain need to satisfy, the need to protect India from its hostile neighbors. So all the basics of that would have been addressed in the 8th lecture, and I'll give you the link in the description box. Maybe you can have a look at that particular video, brush up on your basics and foundations, and then come watch this particular video. All right. So in today's lecture, we'll be discussing about missiles and navy related news of the last 1 year. Right, when it comes to combat aircrafts, right, we don't really have much progress. We are very slow in terms of development of an indigenous combat aircraft. But when it comes to naval technology as well as when it comes to development of missiles, India is really progressing at a very rapid pace. In fact, there are certain critical missile technologies where we are world leader, and at least if not the world leader, we are at least in the select group of nations in the world to have the latest cutting edge technologies. Right, in some cases like hypersonic missile systems, we are among the top 3 or 4 nations in the entire world. Only 4 nations have this technology and we are one among them. So there's a lot of progress which is made on the front of missile development, and every year in prelims UPSC makes it a point to ask a question on missile related news. Right, so most years there is always a question on related to missiles. I'll show you the case. These are 6 questions from the previous 6 years. Okay, and out of which there are 4 questions which are asked only from missiles. Okay, this is about ballistic missile Agni 5, this is about Agni 4, this is another missile defense system, and this is another missile system. Right, so we have many questions asked pertaining to missiles. And especially in the last 1 year, India has made tremendous progress in terms of development of its missile capability. So that's why we'll make use of this session to refresh our memory about missiles, its technologies that are used in different subsystems of the missiles. Right, and more or less we'll be touching upon the basics of whatever you know about missiles and navy related issues. Alright, so before we proceed any further, I just want to give you a glimpse of what is the nature of questions asked. I'm not here to simply give you answers for these questions. It's just to give you an idea about what kind of probing UPSC does when it comes to missile related technologies. Right, you can see here there's a question asked about Agni 4 missile. Right, there are 3 statements given. It's surface to surface missile. Right, most of you can get it right. It's a surface to surface missile. It is fueled by liquid propellant only. Okay, so here is where you may think that okay, somebody has taught you that whenever there is a word only, most probably it is wrong, so let me go for it as wrong. You may even get this answer right. It is actually not propelled only by liquid propellant. You can be lucky enough to get this particular statement right, but let's assume if only UPSC slightly twists this question, right, and instead of liquid propellant, if only UPSC uses solid here, right, Agni 4 missile is fueled by solid propellant only, and you assume that okay, the word only is there, so let me mark it as incorrect. No, you will go wrong. Okay, Agni 4 missile works on solid propellant. Right, so this is how you may actually find it that all your template strategies may actually fail you. It may fool you, trick you in the real examination. Right, so this is the reason why we need to know about the specifics. We need to know about various technical aspects regarding different missiles. See, these 2 questions are slightly technical, whereas these 2 questions asked on missiles are simply superficial level. It's only about you should have once heard about what these terminologies are. If you have been following newspapers, somewhere or the other you would have come across these terminologies, and just the awareness is good enough to get these questions right. But the other 2, you need to know something about missile technology, right, and especially a question like this, maybe that year by eliminating extreme options which carries the word only, solely. If you would have just used that logic, you could have been lucky, but if only the word, instead of liquid, if it was solid, that would have actually cost you a question, right? So which means that it's better we get into the technicalities of missile technologies, right? And it's very interesting. And even the idea whether a missile is solid propelled or liquid propelled, it's not something to be memorized, it's something to be understood. If only you know the characteristics of liquid propellants, you will be able to actually understand where all it can possibly be used. Let's say I ask you a random question, whether BrahMos cruise missile, whether does it use solid propellant or liquid propellant, you may not be able to actually recollect it, you may not even know about it, right? But what if I told you liquid propellants have better maneuverability? Liquid propellants, by their very nature, they can be switched on and off, they can be turned on and off. There is better control that you actually have over liquid propellants and its flow rather than solid propellants. Now if you can actually think, okay, cruise missiles, if you would only know about the behavior of cruise missiles, you would know that cruise missiles have much higher maneuverability mid course. Ballistic missiles, once you launch, you leave it to the gravity to have its effect, but cruise missiles, you propel throughout its course. So which means that you will keep on maneuvering it as per where your target goes. So if you want to have better maneuverability, you need to actually switch on and off your flow of propellants. So automatically you may start understanding that liquid propellants are a better choice when it comes to cruise missiles, right? So these are the ways how you can actually understand things, how you can utilize your knowledge to get answers right. So it's not about giving a table and asking you to mug up BrahMos, first stage is solid propellant, last stage is liquid propellant, nearby it's completely liquid propellant, if again first stage is solid propellant, next stage is liquid propellant. It's not about mugging up, it's about understanding that it's only in the last stage of a cruise missile where all the terminal maneuvers have to be done. Initially you don't have to need maneuvers. As the target approaches, when the target tries to evade, you need to do all the maneuvers. So first stage you don't need a liquid propellant, next stage you may need a liquid propellant, right? So similarly you will be able to actually understand why missile defense systems, they use completely solid propellants, they don't use liquid propellant, right? So there are certain reasons why all these technologies are used in a particular way, right? And it's very interesting to actually get to know and understand about all of them as well. All right, so that's the sole purpose of this particular session. So before we get into the details of the session, let me give you some questions to just tickle your brain, so that you can actually think whether you are able to answer these questions or not, right? So we have two questions here, and I would leave it to you to figure out an answer for this. You can pause the video here and try to think about whether you know the answers for these questions, and the answers for these questions will be found as we get along with the lecture. All right, so let's start our discussion. So before we get into the discussion, let me also give you a brief idea about the history of our guided missile development program. And in my previous video on defense, I would have given you an idea about our security and strategic needs. I would have pointed out to you about the presence of hostile neighbors on north and western front, and why do we need a very strong second strike capability, right? Because we have a no first use policy, so every country can take us for a ride. In order to have a word of caution to them, that's why we have what is called as a very lethal and a destructive second strike capability, and that is ensured through missiles, right? And that was an era when we had to constantly depend on foreign suppliers for our combat aircrafts. So that's why we need to become indigenous. Even till date we have not become indigenous when it comes to combat aircraft. It's a very difficult technology to master. Huge financial outlay and investments have to go into development of combat aircrafts, but that's not the same case with missiles. And especially since we have already had the experience of rocket launch vehicles, right? So we had a start with which we can actually build on our indigenous missile development programs. That's why India in the year 1988, it first experimented with its missiles, and just a year before, in 1987, Western countries like Canada, US and Japan and many other countries who already had missile technologies, they had placed a restriction in the form of missile technology control regime. They basically, it's a handful of nations, it's a cartel of nations who would not want the missile technology to be to be developed by other countries other than those who had already had the technology in the year 1987, right? And in 88 India develops its own missile, and immediately we were subjected to a lot of sanctions. So all the important critical technologies for further missile developments, right? 88 was our experimental missile, so that actually gave a notice to the world that India is emerging as a serious player who wants its own missile development program, right? So that's why we were subjected to a lot of embargo, we were subjected to a lot of restrictions, and many critical technologies required for various subsystems of missiles were all made unavailable to us, right? See, missile is like a human body, and inside a body you have a respiratory system, you have a digestive system, you have a neurological system, right? Similarly, in a missile you have various subsystems. A missile is a composite system, so inside a missile you have various subsystems, right? So starting from the interconnect system, so that is about how you latch a missile to a base, right? So how do you latch a missile to a launching pad, and what would be the release mechanism, and then you need to have a propellant subsystem, like how do you power the glide of a missile, how do you power the path of a missile, right? So there are just so many such subsystems. One is about payload, right? Other one is about tracking, seeking, right? All of these are complex systems, right? And so for India, because it was subjected to these restrictions, it proved to be a boon in disguise. So under the umbrella of DRDO, various laboratories were set up, right? So today, for example, the propellants, the fuel, right, so that is developed in a separate location. We have HEML, I think High Energy Materials Laboratory, right? So I think it's in somewhere in Maharashtra. So that's where we develop our propellants. Similarly, to develop guidance system, we have Advanced Systems Laboratory, and to test our final terminal ballistics, right, we have what is called as Terminal Ballistics Laboratory, right? So we have a lot of organizations, labs indigenously having come up with, as a result of which India has today become one among the select handful of countries which have their own capacity to produce all the different missiles required for different use cases, right? We have a need to target cities like Beijing, right, which is very far away from India, right? So we need to have missiles which can even go up to Beijing. At the same time, we need to have missiles which, if launched, would simply fall 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers away, so it can be used in a battlefront formation. So we have different needs, and then we need requirements of missiles to be launched from surface, which goes and attacks an incoming airborne object, and then we need to have missiles which, launched from air, can strike another object in air, right? So our needs are very divergent, and the very restrictions that were put on India, the restrictions that India was subject to as a result of MTCR in 1988, actually helped in the development of our own indigenous missile development program, right? And thanks to that, today India is very self-reliant, self-sufficient in all its defense missile needs, right? So in the context of missile development, the words that we frequently get to encounter are tactical strategic missiles, right? The deeper meaning of these I have explained in the first video, but let me just give you a glimpse of what that meaning is. Basically, strategic needs, it means long distance need. Okay, tactical is more of short range needs, right? So let's say we have our soldiers lined here, and then there are enemy soldiers here, right? They are engaged in war, so the positions are very close to each other. In that case, we cannot simply launch a missile with a nuclear warhead and just nuke the entire place. Our own forces will be killed. So you need to launch very precision targeted missiles, right, which has a very short blast radius, correct? Those are what are called as tactical missiles. Okay, so in our whole arsenal of the missiles that we have, our entire Agni series, right? So the latest Agni 5 series of missiles, they are all strategic missiles. They are used for long distance. A wholesale destruction actually happens because of the warheads carried by the Agni series of missiles. They are for long distance purposes. And then for our tactical purposes, that is where we have our entire Prithvi series, right? So for all surface to surface needs, for tactical purposes, we have our Prithvi series. It's very simple. For surface to surface needs, we only have two classes of missiles. One is the Agni series, which are basically strategic long distance missiles. And when it comes to tactical short distance missiles, we have a class which is called as Prithvi, right? So it's very, very simple. Okay, and cruise missiles are recent developments in missile technology because they have certain advantages which ballistic missiles don't have, right? We'll get to see what those cruise missiles are. And as our expanding needs in warfare, we also need to have missiles which are called as anti-tank missiles, right? So that can help our armed forces, that can help our army when dealing with enemy tanks, right? So for that we have certain missiles which are called as the anti-tank missiles. We'll have a look at them. And then moving to the last, we need to have defense systems, both from conventional ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, as well as new forms of warfare such as drone swarms, right? Drones are very, very tiny objects, small objects. So we need to have protection system against these modern warfare mechanisms as well, just such as drones, right? Because even the recent ongoing conflict in the Middle East as well as in Russia, Ukraine, we have seen how a lot of drones have been employed in warfare, and many of these drones are what are called as the suicide drones. They carry explosives, they just come and they crash on a target, right? So drones are quite lethal that way. So that's the reason why we need effective protection mechanisms against drones as well. And India has on its own developed all solutions for all these different problems. All right, so let's get into the session, and we'll see how India has progressed with the development of solutions in all this regard. All right, so I would like to point your attention to this particular news, which was actually published on January 22nd of 2025, right? So has a very high possibility of turning out as a question in this year's prelims. There are two things to be noted here. One is the word scramjet, other one is the word hypersonic. All right, so you need to know something about both of these terminologies, right? So first, the scramjet technology is basically a terminology that is used in the context of propulsion. You need to propel the missile, right? You need to take it from one place to the other place, and for that you need propellants. So some of the propellants could be solid propellants, some of them could be liquid, and missiles like BrahMos use both solid and liquid, so that's why we call them as hybrid, right? And BrahMos missile, for example, has what is called as ramjet technology, right? So you need to actually have a clear idea about all these terminologies and what it actually means. So those who already have an interest in defense, in missile systems and aviation and all of that, they may have some exposure to that, but others just pay attention to it as I clarify for you. Okay, so what does hypersonic mean? Basically, depending upon the speed at which you travel, the travel is classified into different categories, right? For the first category is what is called as subsonic speeds, the other one is what is called as supersonic speeds, and the last category is what is called as the hypersonic speeds. Subsonic is less than the speed of sound, which is less than 1200 kilometers per hour, right? Supersonic is more than the speed of sound. So anything above 1200 kilometers per hour comes under supersonic. Up to what range? Up to 5 times this particular range, so which is called as the Mach 5 speeds, right? Anything greater than Mach 5, right? If you travel beyond, let's say, around 6500 kilometers per hour, if you travel beyond that range, then the travel is actually called as hypersonic travel. All right, so I need to ask you certain questions here. Do missiles in India travel at hypersonic speeds? What do you think about it? Or do they travel only at supersonic speeds? I said BrahMos uses ramjet technique, right? And by using ramjet, you can actually achieve only supersonic travel. You cannot really achieve hypersonic travel. So does it mean that we don't have any missiles in India which are capable of traveling at hypersonic speeds? You need to actually understand how these missiles are propelled. All right, let me give you some clarity, further clarity more on that. Let's say ballistic missiles, right? Ballistic missiles, we have an entire lineup of ballistic missiles. We have the entire Prithvi series here, and we have the entire Agni series here. Maybe one or two additional missiles could be there, right? So these are all the different Prithvi, the tactical missile series, and then we have the different Agni, which are all the different strategic ballistic missiles, right? So let's take the case of Agni 5, right? Agni 5, it's launched at Calcutta, launched targeting Beijing, right? So let's say it's at a distance of 5,000 kilometers. So how do we propel Agni? So you see the size of Agni, it's so huge, Agni 5. For reference, here is a human being who is 6 feet tall. So a 6 feet tall human being is just here, right? So you can see what is the scale of Agni, right? Why is Agni missile so big? First of all, because it carries both fuel, which is actually the propellant, along with what is called as oxidizer, right? It has to carry fuel along with oxygen. The reason being, Agni goes outside atmosphere. When it goes outside atmosphere, it doesn't have oxygen, and without oxygen, combustion cannot happen. So that's the reason why Agni has to continuously carry its oxidizer as it goes, right? So that's why the missile is also too big. All right. So, and moreover, it's big because it carries a lot of fuel, because that gives it more of range, basically, right? So the Agni missile goes out of atmosphere, so it has to sustain its combustion even outside atmosphere in exoatmospheric conditions. So it carries its own oxidizer. This is how rockets also function, right? Rockets carry their own oxidizer because they go outside atmosphere and they still have to continue on combustion path, right? So this is the case with ballistic missiles, certain ballistic missiles. For example, ballistic missiles like Prahar, they only have a range of 150 kilometers. So they don't even leave atmosphere in the first place, right? So they don't have to carry their oxidizers. All right. So imagine the case of Agni. So a ballistic missile follows a parabolic path, and a ballistic missile goes outside atmosphere. This is its maximum height that it reaches. At this point, its velocity becomes 0. There is no more propulsion that actually happens, right? And from there, now the missile is accelerated because of the effect of gravity. Gravity attracts the missile, so its acceleration is provided by the force of gravity. So by the time it reaches its target in Beijing, the missile probably would be traveling at 25,000 kilometers per hour speed, which is Mach 25 ranges, right? It travels at extremely high speeds. Okay, this is basically a hypersonic travel. So it's not, do not think that in India for the first time missiles have reached hypersonic speeds. No, ballistic missiles, since they are accelerated by the force of gravity, they usually reach hypersonic speeds. It's very easy for them to reach hypersonic speeds. All right. So ballistic missiles reach hypersonic speeds. Keep this point in your mind, because they go to extremely great heights, and from there, since gravity accelerates, they are capable of reaching high speeds, right? And one other aspect which I would like to tell you about ballistic missiles is, so let's say in Beijing they have a radar system, right? A radar which continuously tracks and monitors incoming objects. The radar will easily detect the Agni 5 missile, right? Because the missile comes from a long distance and it easily leaves a radar signature, right? But the speed with which it comes and makes an impact, it makes it difficult to intercept ballistic missiles. Ballistic missiles are easy to identify but difficult to intercept. Difficult to intercept because of multiple reasons. One is its high speed, and the other reason is ballistic missiles are capable of carrying what is called as multiple warheads, right? You see this missile, as the missile comes closer to Beijing, it leaves 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different targets, 5 different projectiles, 5 different warheads are actually launched, right? So you may not actually know what is the real, and not only these warheads, they also have a lot of decoys. Decoys are fakes, right? It mimics as if a missile, a bomb is just being dropped. So immediately the air defense, the missile defense system in Beijing, it will be launched, it will go and destroy the decoys for no use, and then the real nuclear weapon will be dropped, explosion will happen. And all of this is happening at Mach 25 speeds, and no missile defense system is capable of traveling and intercepting such high speed incoming projectiles, right? That is why I say ballistic missiles, though they are easy to detect, it's very, very difficult to intercept them. All right. So just to understand, ballistic missiles, they are capable of routinely reaching hypersonic speeds. So do not come under this, get this impression when I come to this point, right? DRDO carries out successful flight trial of India's first long-range hypersonic missile. When I come to this particular news article, do not be under this impression for the first time we have a missile which is capable of reaching hypersonic speeds. No. This is basically a missile that completely travels in endo-atmospheric condition. In endo-atmospheric condition, reaching hypersonic speed is a miracle. But when missiles go out of the atmosphere, since they are accelerated by gravity, reaching hypersonic speed is actually possible. Let's be clear about that. Now let's look at the different propulsion technology. Right? We need to know the meaning of the words jet, ramjet, scramjet. Right, because that's the news here. India conducts first scramjet ground test. All right. So what is this scramjet? Basically, you need to know there are 3 different ways of how jet propulsion happens in endo-atmospheric conditions in our Earth's atmosphere, where you have plentiful of oxygen supply. Right. So within the Earth's atmosphere, where you have oxygen, the first type of propulsion is a result of turbojet engines. Where do you find turbojet engines? You find that in your Indigo aeroplane. You have it in MiG-21 fighter aircraft. Right? So all of these are jet engines, and in the previous video I have given you an explanation as to how jet engines function. Right? And for those who might not have watched the previous video, let me just tell you, jet engine functions by compressing the air into a narrow chamber, and where fuel is injected, combustion takes place, thrust is generated on the opposite side. So jet engines are capable of achieving up to Mach 3 speeds. Right? Mach 3 is supersonic. I have already told you in the previous lecture, MiG-21 was capable back then in the 1960s itself. MiG-21, the Russian aircraft, was capable of reaching Mach 2 speeds. And today, just with afterburners, what is afterburner? I have explained it in the previous video. With afterburners, combat aircrafts can even reach up to Mach 3 speeds, and that's what's given here. Simple normal jet engines, turbojet engines, they can reach Mach 3 speeds. Right? How do we go beyond that? How do we get into higher speeds? Let's say up to 5 times the speed of sound. Is there any possibility? Yes. The possibility is by using what is called as ramjet. Right? So let's say you have started achieving Mach 3 speeds. You have achieved great speeds. In that high speeds, now air comes very fast. Right? Air mixture comes very fast. Here in this type of engine, you don't have these kind of compressing blades like how you have in a jet engine. There are no compressing blades. Air comes at a very high speed, and with the force that it enters, the profile of the chamber squeezes the air into a narrow chamber, as a result of which automatically compression happens, and in this same place combustion also takes place. Right? So air comes at a very high speed, fuel is also getting exhausted at a high speed. Right? More air, more fuel, more combustion, more thrust, more speeds. This is the logic. Right? So ramjet cannot be used to start from rest. It cannot be used to start propelling a missile from a state of absolute rest. First, the missile has to be propelled by turbojet engine, and once Mach 3 speeds are reached, then the ramjet action kicks in. Then ramjet technology can be used to achieve even greater speeds, and there is a limitation. Ramjet can travel only up to Mach 5. It cannot go beyond Mach 5. Right? And is ramjet engine used anywhere in India? Yes, our BrahMos missile, for example. BrahMos cruise missile, it's called as a supersonic missile. Why? Because it travels far higher than the speed of sound. And how does it actually travel? It travels up to Mach 4, Mach 5 speeds. And how is it capable of achieving such high speeds? It's because it uses ramjet engine. Alright. But going beyond Mach 5 becomes impossible, or becomes very, very difficult in ramjet engine, and that too sustaining the flight over a long distance for 5 minutes or 10 minutes is close to impossible. I'll tell you the reason. You can imagine the reason to be something like this. Try holding a candle when cyclonic winds are blowing on your face, or try holding a candle when you are traveling in a motorbike at 100 kilometers per hour speed. Impossible, right? That's the same problem with ramjets, right? When you travel at like Mach 5 speeds, the wind flow is so powerful that the flame stabilization becomes extremely difficult. That's a technology that only 3 other countries have mastered, right? USA, Russia and China, and India is the 4th country with this particular news, right? So we have now conducted our first scramjet ground test. So we have simulated it in the ground in laboratory, and we have found out that we have pumped air at such high speeds, simulating Mach 5 plus scenario, right? Imagine you are traveling at Mach 5 speed and you have wind blowing opposite side. So the same situation can be simulated on the ground in laboratories, and we have tried to stabilize the flame, right? So when you read this article, you will understand for 120 seconds the flame did not go out, which means that we are just there, right? We have learnt how to retain the combustion even at such high speeds, which means that we have developed scramjet engine, right? So many other and a few more handful of countries also have scramjet engine, but no country till date has deployed scramjet technology in its missile propulsion, right? let me revisit the ideas that I have discussed now. Scramjet is a magical phenomenon because it helps you achieve Mach 9 speeds, Mach 10 speeds, which is basically around 12,000 km per hour, right? But is this something strange? Is this something that no other missiles in India have ever reached? No. When you use ballistic missiles, by the effect of gravity, automatically you are capable of reaching such high speeds like Mach 20 speeds of Agni, right? But achieving such high speeds in endo-atmospheric condition, when you are constantly working against the gravity, right? I'll show you an image here. This is Agni 5 missile. Let's assume this is Agni 5, right? The missile constantly accelerates, goes out of the space. This is the missile on its way out of the space, right? It has a very steady rate of combustion, and since you don't have to turn off the fuel combustion or anything at any point of time, Agni 5 uses only solid propellants. Why? Once you start, let's imagine your Diwali crackers, you have your rocket that you actually fire in Diwali. Once you ignite it, it just exhausts, it just burns completely, right? So solid propellants give a steady rate of combustion, right? But controlling the combustion becomes challenging when it comes to solid propellants, right? But look at this particular missile. This is, let's say, a cruise missile, okay? So it's launched. As soon as it's launched, look at it, it just turns its trajectory. Cruise missiles are also called as terrain hugging missiles. Why? Because they go very close, very parallel to the terrain. They just travel parallel at almost at a height of 10 meters. It is at that height they are capable of just hugging close to the terrain, right? So this kind of a missile, as soon as it's launched, it makes a turn. Now it just simply travels parallel, and when it's traveling parallel till it reaches its target, it's continuously propelled against the gravity, right? So this missile is used completely in endo-atmospheric condition. Unlike the ballistic missile, which I have just explained to you, ballistic missiles go out of the space, they make a re-entry. Unlike those ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, they do not even leave the atmosphere. Continuously they are propelled throughout the journey. Whereas you take the case of ballistic missile, only for half the distance we give propulsion, and the remaining half of the distance is traveled by the effect of gravity, right? So cruise missiles, no, throughout the journey there is continuous propulsion. So all these turbojet, ramjet, scramjet, these are all technologies that we are trying to master, so that one day we can use the scramjet technology, let's say in BrahMos missile or in Nirbhaya missile, right? Once we are able to use the scramjet technology in a cruise missile, we will be able to achieve speeds like 10,000 kilometers per hour speed. Imagine BrahMos missile traveling at 10,000 kilometers per hour speed. Before the enemy can even take countermeasures, the missile would have struck his target. And anyway, these cruise missiles, since they happen to go very low, they are very difficult to detect, right? The radars are always looking up into the sky, and the ballistic missiles, until they come close, it's not possible to detect. Cruise missiles, until they come close to the target, it's impossible to detect the arrival of an enemy missile. And imagine the missile is traveling at hypersonic speeds now because of scramjet implementation. No countermeasures can be taken. The missile just comes and destroys your entire target, right? So India has conducted and it has developed its ground-based scramjet technology. The day when we are able to implement it into our cruise missiles, we become a very powerful force. Our missiles cannot be detected until the last minute, and by the time their enemy system wakes up, already the missile is traveling at hypersonic speeds. So it's a fraction of a second. So it's like every second the missile covers 10 kilometers. Imagine, right? So by the time the enemy systems can even be alerted and they react, already the missile is too close and the destruction is complete, right? So this is what we have actually accomplished very recently, with India having conducted its first scramjet ground test, right? So it's something very, very groundbreaking. It's very revolutionary in terms of improving our missile capabilities. All right. So I hope you have an idea about what is jet, what is ramjet, what is scramjet, right? Jet engines, they work by simply compressing the air and then burning the air and the fuel mixture in the combustion chamber. Ramjet engines, once a particular speed is picked up, the incoming air itself gives a force for combustion, thrust is produced. Scramjet, extremely high speeds beyond Mach 5 levels, that is when scramjet becomes effective. Reason is because ramjet, the flame goes out. So we have different flame stabilization techniques in scramjet. As a result of air, extremely high speeds of air with fuel mixture and with flame stabilizing, now more force is created. Extremely high speeds beyond Mach 5 on a continuous basis can be achieved with the help of scramjet engine, right? So these are all some of the differences between these terminologies. So now when you go and read this news, so it's a 22nd January 2025 news, high possibility to be asked as a different type of a question. So that's why I have framed a question here. Hypersonic speeds refers to speeds above Mach 3. No, it's about Mach 5 plus. Scramjet engines can be used to achieve hypersonic speeds. Yes, very much. Right? So both statements are right in this context. All right. So understand, cruise missiles, look at this is, let's say this is BrahMos, right? So once it is launched, see how it is launched. It's launched and you see fire, you see fire there, which is actually used to turn the direction of the missile, right? So which means that BrahMos missile, now it's launched, let's say it has a range of 250 kilometers, okay? The BrahMos missile, it's a supersonic missile. So it has a range of 250 kilometers. It uses ramjet technique, right? Remember ramjet? So it means that at high speeds, high amount of combustion takes place. That's why it has a smaller range, because so much of fuel is spent achieving supersonic speeds. All right. So BrahMos, supersonic, lesser range. So in 250 kilometers, the target is only in the last distance. So for the entire journey, the missile simply has to travel in a straight line. So it's only when it comes closer to the target, maybe the target may try to move. So the missile also has to do some maneuvers, right? So that's why I told you, when it comes to maneuverability, how do you maneuver? Look at this. Suddenly you turn on a booster here, booster down, booster at the top surface, as a result of which you are able to create thrusts. All that is happening by directing the fuel flow, switching on, switching it off, right? I told you, solid propellants, you have less control over its combustion, whereas liquid propellant, you can simply turn off the valve, then turn it on again. So that is how you can actually control combustion. So understand, wherever you need better maneuverability of the missile, it's easier to use liquid propellants over solid propellants, right? But liquid propellants have their own problems. You would have seen rocket launch countdown happening, right? Whenever rockets are launched on ISRO, you have countdowns happening. You would have seen that rockets will be filled with fuels, liquid fuel, especially the last minute, right? Why? What is the reason for that? Because liquid propellants, if they are filled well in advance, they start corroding the inner walls of the container. They start corroding the inner walls of the missile, which actually affects the structural integrity and stability of the missiles, right? So liquid propellants are hard, difficult to handle, all right? So liquid propellants are rarely used. They are only used wherever it is necessary. Okay, so that is why we minimize the use of liquid propellants only in the last end, where we need better maneuverability of the missile, whereas in the initial stage of the missile, where we need continuous propulsion, we simply go with the use of solid propellant. So what I am trying to say is, BrahMos has both solid as well as liquid propellant. This is not something to mug up. This is something to understand that you need a continuous propulsion, and at the terminal stage you need better maneuverability. So we go for liquid propellants at the last stage alone, right? So you will find there are two cruise missiles that we have in India today. BrahMos, which is developed because of collaboration with Russia, and another indigenously developed cruise missile which is called as Nirbhay, right? So this Nirbhay missile, it also has two stages. First, solid stage, followed by liquid stage, liquid propellant, right? Nirbhay is actually not a supersonic missile. It is a slow missile. It is a subsonic missile. It simply uses turbojet engine. It does not use ramjet engine. So what it means is, since it travels slow, the amount of fuel it consumes is also lesser, as a result of which it can travel over a longer distance. Okay, BrahMos, high speed, short distance. Nirbhay, low speed, more distance. That's why you will find Nirbhay can travel up to a distance of 1000 kilometers, and this is indigenously developed by DRDO in India, right? So it's an indigenously developed cruise missile, a subsonic speed missile, traveling with the help of turbojet engine, traveling for up to 1000 kilometers, long range cruise missile. Whereas BrahMos, short range, high speed supersonic missile. All right. So I hope you are able to understand that the missiles in India, right, we divide them into ballistic as well as cruise missile based on their mode of action. Correct. So you see, there could be ballistic missiles like Prahar, only 150 kilometers range, Prithvi, only 350-500 kilometers range. But at the same time, you have cruise missiles like Nirbhay, which can go up to 1000 kilometers. So don't assume that all ballistic missiles have greater range, all cruise missiles have lesser range. No, that is not the case, right? The range is basically an indicator whether they are used as a strategic weapon or whether they are used as a tactical weapon, right? But it's all about how easily they can be detected. Ballistic missiles can be easily detected, whereas cruise missiles, since they travel low, they cannot be easily detected, and that is what makes them the next generation missiles that we have to constantly develop. And especially when these cruise missiles are paired with scramjet technology, they are a very lethal weapon. All right. So now that I have explained to you about the scramjet technology, I'll also come to another news which has been recently there. This was in the month of November 17 of 2024. What is this? DRDO carries out its successful flight trial of India's first long-range hypersonic missile. That makes me question, how did India carry out a hypersonic missile test in 2024, whereas its scramjet technology was only mastered in the ground level in 2025, the old other news that I showed you, right? So it means that hypersonic speeds can also be reached with ramjet. Okay, you can reach up to Mach 5, Mach 6 speed also. Hypersonic speeds can be reached with ramjet, but sustaining it becomes the challenge, right? You cannot sustain it for a longer period of time because the flame goes out. So yes, we have reached hypersonic speeds, but nowhere in this news actually talks about for what duration did we fly in hypersonic zone. It could be only for 10 seconds, it could be only for 20 seconds, right? Whereas scramjet engine, if it is used, it can give a complete sustained flight for a very long period of time, right? So that duration of flight at for which hypersonic speeds were constantly maintained was not actually given in this news, or maybe it's kept confidential, we don't know. But all we know is there is a potential for questions to be framed on hypersonic flight. There is a question to be framed both on hypersonic as well as scramjet as well, right? So if you are watching this video till here, let me give you an assignment. Read this news. You will find out that India has tested what is called as hypersonic missiles, right? Only very few countries, US, Russia, China and India, we have this technology. But North Korea also recently has come up with its own variation of hypersonic testing, right? That's called as hypersonic glide vehicle. Alright, so you tell me what is the difference between hypersonic glide vehicle versus hypersonic cruise missile, right? You can probably drop this difference as a comment in the comment box. Alright, so try to learn it. It is very interesting to learn about what is hypersonic glide vehicle and its contrast with hypersonic cruise missile. Alright, it's very interesting. So get to know what it is. Alright, so we have discussed up to this, right? So now you know what is a cruise missile, what is a ballistic missile, what is turbojet, ramjet, what is scramjet. Alright, so let's also have a look at other missile related news in the last 1 year, whatever has figured in the news. And this is actually a paper clipping of Hindu newspaper. What it shows, it says is the Desi Tomahawk, right? So what is Tomahawk? Tomahawk is basically a US missile, a cruise missile, right? So USA also have their own versions of these kind of cruise missiles, right? So tomorrow UPSC can frame a question, which of the following falls under the category of cruise missiles that are developed by different countries across the world, right? Nirbhay would be given, some Russian missile could be given, and third Tomahawk can be given. So you may be asked to choose the right answer among the 3 options given, right? So Tomahawk is a US cruise missile. Nirbhay BrahMos is an Indian cruise missile. Similarly, find out what is the Russian cruise missile and post it in the comment box. Alright. So, this is how you have to keep yourself open when you read these kind of news articles. Right. So, UPSC is not expecting you to know each and every cruise missile developed in all different countries across the world. No. But at least something that has figured in the news like this, it's an opportunity for you to learn something about Tomahawk missiles. Alright, so let's look at the other missile systems which have been in the news in the last 1 year. This is another very interesting missile which was actually developed by India indigenously. Okay, what is this system? It's a hybrid system, a hybrid between missiles and torpedoes. Okay, so this missile system is called as SMART, supersonic missile assisted release of torpedoes, right? The description is given here, supersonic missile assisted release of torpedoes. You need to first understand what is a torpedo, because you know what is a supersonic missile. Try to understand what is a torpedo. So this is a submarine which is actually underwater, it's concealed, it's hidden underwater, and they have what are called as openings. These openings are called as hatches, right? So these hatches are filled with water, and a torpedo, it's actually loaded onto that. The submarine might have seen an enemy submarine in the front. The submarine now launches its torpedo, right? It just aims, now the torpedo is launched. So what is a torpedo? It's a steel metal container, and the top of the torpedo the top portion, it contains what is called as a warhead, right? It's just an explosive, a bomb, right? So how is the torpedo propelled underwater? It is propelled with the help of electrical energy. There are torpedoes which have so many batteries inside. All the batteries are simply connected to a DC motor, and the DC motor just propels, because underwater you have good buoyancy, right? You, with very less amount of energy, electrical energy, you can simply propel the torpedoes, right? And the torpedoes, they would have seen a ship in the front, okay, and the torpedoes have sound recognition systems, because these ships, right, these ships, from their propellers, from the engines, they release a lot of noise, and the noise can be felt underwater, right? The torpedo has the sound sensors, as a result of which the torpedo exactly steers and it goes near the source of the sound, goes and hits the ship, as a result of which the ship breaks, ship explodes. This is how torpedoes function, right? Torpedoes are simply missiles for underwater purposes, all right? So they are warhead carrying systems for underwater combat, right? So why has India developed this smart system, supersonic missile assisted release of torpedoes? Why has India come up with this particular system? Let's try to understand that. I'll give you a case in this regard. Let's assume there is a submarine. This is a Chinese submarine, and this Chinese submarine is found underwater in the Bay of Bengal region, right? It's underwater, and let's say luckily our sonar systems have found out that there is a Chinese submarine lurking in the waters of Bay of Bengal, and we feel it's very, very dangerous to send another Indian submarine. We only have one submarine, INS Arihant, and if that is gone, it's finished, right? So whereas Chinese have multiple nuclear submarines, so we feel it's dangerous to risk our submarines in these waters to take out this particular submarine, right? So now what do we do is, from a distance, let's say from Andaman and Nicobar Islands, from there we launch this missile, right? The missile travels at supersonic speeds, probably it may be using ramjet technology, goes at supersonic speeds, and the top portion, right, this is actually a torpedo, right? Basically the missile, instead of carrying a bomb, instead of carrying a warhead, this supersonic missile is simply carrying a torpedo. You see, the missile just comes, it slows down because of the parachute, the missile slows down, and finally the missile, the torpedo, the top portion, it comes and finally the parachute detaches, the torpedo is finally dropped into the water, and now the torpedo locates the submarine, the torpedo goes and hits the target, right? It's a very necessary innovation for India's context, right? Because in naval warfare, Chinese are very, very powerful. They have a bigger navy, better navy than India. That's why we cannot afford to lose our ships so easily. That's why when an enemy vessel, a submarine is located, and or leave a submarine, okay, even if you have located an enemy ship and you don't want to bring another Indian ship and to have direct combat, you can use these kind of methods, right? From a distance you can simply launch a torpedo, let the torpedo go and strike at the target, right? So you can understand this is a latest development by DRDO, right? So what kind of a system can be question can be asked in this topic? Maybe UPSC can ask, recently smart missile system has been developed by India, what does it refer to? And they can give you the expansion of that. Slight trick here and there can be done, okay, to confuse you, right? Or they can ask you about torpedoes, right? How does a torpedo, what is the difference between torpedo and a missile, right? You know, such kind of questions can be asked. So just understand, this is another latest naval technology which is recently in news, all right? So let's move on. We now come to certain terms which have been in the news in the last 1 year, all right? So these are terms which have been used in the context of defense developments in other countries across the world, okay? So the first word is kamikaze drones, right? What is this word kamikaze? When during the time of Second World War, the Japanese, they started losing towards the end of Second World War. They started losing in a lot of battles. They had to lose to the Western powers, right? So the Japanese, they finally had an idea, committing suicide, and in the process going and attacking the enemy positions, right? There were two different types of Japanese suicide squads. One was they simply take a flight, a combat aircraft, fill it with explosives, and they just come and crash it against an aircraft carrier. That is one way of how suicide squads functioned during the time of Second World War. And then there are certain Japanese suicide squads who used to sit in underground torpedoes, and they used to come underwater and they used to crash against the ships. So basically they are more like suicide fighters, right? So that's what kamikaze means. So similarly, in the recent conflicts, be it Russia-Ukraine war or be it the Middle East conflict, right? So in the last 1 year, I've seen so many videos where the Iranian drones, when it comes to Middle East, for the entire Muslim world, Iran is the supplier of all these kind of military hardware, right? So it's because all other Arab countries, the Sunni Arab countries, they have all become allies of US. So they all depend their military hardware based on their purchases from US. And since Iran is at loggerheads with US, it's Iran which indigenously develops its own defense products. So Iran has a variant of such suicide drones. Okay, so this is the drone, it's called as Shahid drones. Shahid means same, martyr. Somebody who sacrifices himself is called as a Shahid, right? So the Iranians have named their drones as Shahid drones. So I have seen the videos of where Shahid drones were used by the Gaza terrorists, when they actually used these Shahid drones to go and attack objects inside Israel, right? So Shahid drones, so this is like a new generation of drones which can be used as suicide squads. Imagine, not one or two, thousands of Shahid drones all coming together against a particular target. So that's the way modern warfare is evolving, drone warfare, unmanned warfare, and it can actually have very precise targeting also, right? So understanding the utility of such suicide drones, that's why India has also developed its own version of suicide drone, which is called as the Nagastra. It's called loitering munition. Loitering means what? It just roams around, right? So Shahid drone, it actually travels at a very low speed, around 400-500 kilometers per hour speed, not more than that, right? It travels at a very low speed, comes very close to the target, it just glides in and around the target, and where exactly it has to go and hit, it goes and hits, right? So India has its own form of suicide drones, which is called as Nagastra 1, right, version 1. So this is something that you can actually be familiar with. And next, in the same Israel versus Hamas conflict, that is when in the last 1.5 years we have seen the Israel's missile defense system put into extensive use. They call their missile defense system as Iron Dome system. It's because Israel is surrounded by hostile neighbors on all sides, and all these neighbors, they some way or the other, they get access to what is called as mortars, right, or small missiles. So from, let's say, from the border of Lebanon or from the border of Palestine, right? So these revolutionaries or the rebels or fighters or terrorists, whatever you may call them as, they continuously launch a barrage of rockets, mortars and small missiles into Israel, right? So that's why Israel has to continuously protect its citizens from the incoming missiles. So how does it protect? It uses a system called as Iron Dome system. How does it work? There is a radar system, right? And the radar system faces the enemy territories. Any incoming missile, immediately it's detected by the radar. Once it is detected by the radar, it goes to the control center, and from the control center, message is sent to a canister, right, a container which has a lot of missiles. The Israel missiles developed are called as Tamir missiles. These Tamir missiles are put in a container, right? So each container will have around 24 missiles, a series of missiles will be there. So depending upon the direction and the location in which the enemy missiles are coming, immediately the Tamir missiles go, right? And what does it actually, how does it actually work? Let's say this is Tamir missile and this is an incoming missile. This is actually fired by Hamas and it just comes closer and closer to Israel. Now Tamir missile goes close to this missile, it does not even hit the missile, but as it goes closer, immediately this Tamir missile explodes. As it explodes, it also destroys the incoming missile as well, right? So their Iron Dome system is based on destruction with the help of what is called as proximity fuse. Right? What is proximity? The closer you come, explosion happens, right? So that better targeting can happen. Otherwise, for example, our S-400 missile system, this is basically a very powerful missile system that we have imported from Russia. It's because India, though it has a missile system, it's not as powerful and as strong as that of a Russian S-400 missile system. Our missile system is simply based on our own Prithvi missiles. Our Prithvi missiles have been remodeled so as to, and they have been connected with radars and control system in a similar way, and Prithvi missiles can go and they can intercept incoming missiles, right? But the Prithvi missiles are latest addition, but S-400 has been a tested workhorse. It has proved its capability in various warfare situations. So that's why India, and also because of the diplomatic relationship that we have with Russia, we have to import certain arms equipments year after year. That's why Indians, we have gone for the import of their S-400 missile defense system. It's actually a ballistic missile defense system which is very powerful, very precise, very targeted, right? S-400 missile systems, they are also missile defense, but they don't work on proximity fuse. They go and work on the principle of kinetic impact, right? They go with extreme speed and they go and destroy the incoming missile with the kinetic impact, right? But proximity fuse is you come close to the missile and you explode, and in turn the incoming missile also destructs, right? So there are different ways of how the termination of the incoming missile can be achieved. We don't have to go into all of that, but the word can be actually asked. UPSC can ask, Iron Dome system, which has been in recently in news, is used, what does it actually refer to, right? So some questions can be framed based on this, all right? But UPSC wouldn't go into the depth of Iron Dome, right? It just will test whether are you capable of being alerted to what Iron Dome system actually stands for. To that extent, yes, UPSC can ask questions, right? So in India, just have this idea, since these are missile defense system, just to understand, in India also we have our own indigenous missile system, which is first developed based on the Prithvi missiles, and now it's Prithvi missile defense system which is presently operational in India out of the indigenous developed variants. Many more are in the pipeline, many more are in the stages of development, all right? You will find a list of all of that in the internet, on the internet, right? But just know, if a question can be asked, Prithvi air defense system, Iron Dome, S-400, these three are missile defense system, all right? Now we come to the next recently in news terminology, which is basically a missile called as NAG, which is nothing but an anti-tank missile, right? So this is a missile which wouldn't have a long range, which will have a very short range, probably 200-300 meters up to maximum 15 or 20 kilometers, right, within visual ranges, right? Let's say you see an enemy tank 4-5 kilometers away, you are able to spot it on a telescope, right? And you want to be hidden, and from here you want to attack and destroy the tank. And destroying a tank is no easy task, because the tank has very, very thick, heavy armor plating, right? There are very few weak spots of a tank on which you actually have to hit and you have to break the tank. There aren't many places in which a tank can be actually broken. It can be paralyzed, right? So you need to have a very effective missile system for that purpose, and over generations, over the years, we have indigenously developed our own system which is called as NAG, which is an anti-tank missile system. So the video clipping that you find here is US anti-tank system, which is called as Javelin, right? Earlier we have seen the Tomahawk system, Javelin is anti-tank system used by US. You see, this is how infantryman, a foot soldier, is able to just have the system in place, and he is able to spot a tank and he can easily launch it. Right? We have different versions. The same anti-tank missile, there is a version that can be launched from helicopter. So it's called Helina. Helina means helicopter Nag. Right? It's called Helina. Right? So similarly, we have tank-based anti-tank missiles where you can launch it from tanks. We have multiple versions. Right? So how does it work? It actually works by locking on the target. Right? So basically, you have to aim at a target. All right, and once you have seen the target in the eyepiece of the missile launcher, now you are able to lock, and that actually gets into the onboard computer which is there in this missile. The missile is able to lock itself to that particular tank, and even though there could be a tank adjacent to that, the missile will precisely go and hit that particular tank, because the army man has actually locked what the target is. Right? So that gets registered into the inbuilt computer that is on board the tank. All right. And what is the advantage of this tank, of this anti-tank missile? These are the modern day battle tanks. They are not the old day battle tanks. You see the surface of the tanks, it has a lot of blocks here, right? Small blocks. What are these blocks? These blocks are not metal. They are what is called as explosive reactive armor. Right? So this is a mechanism discovered, invented, so as to protect these tanks from incoming missiles, which are anti-tank missiles. How do these explosive reactive armors work? As soon as a missile comes and it hits the tank, as soon as it hits the explosive reactive armor, the armor explodes. As a result of which, as soon as the missile makes a contact with the surface, the armor explodes. As a result of which, the missile is destroyed. Right? So anti-tank missile Nag has a defense mechanism for that, what is called as a precursor charge. Right? As the anti-tank missile Nag missile comes closer and closer, it first emits a precursor charge. It's like first charge. Right? That goes and hits the explosive part, explosive reactive armor. Now the armor senses that to be the incoming missile. It bursts, it explodes. Right? Once it explodes, the protection layer is gone. Correct? And now the actual missile part comes. It actually penetrates the tank's body. It goes inside the tank and then it explodes, completely destroying the tank in the process. Right? So understand, Nag is a anti-tank missile which has been indigenously developed, which can be launched from a variety of platforms, and the equivalent of Nag would be the Javelin missiles that have been used by the US armed forces. All right, and you would have also gotten to know what explosive reactive armor actually means. All right, so yeah, this was the news which I have already discussed. It was in news that India has carried out its first long distance hypersonic missile test, right? So basically fully endo-atmospheric, but whether scramjet engine is used or not, we have no idea about it, right? But then how did hypersonic speeds, how was it even reached? Even by ramjet engine, but for a very short duration. I don't want to repeat it again. What I would like to point out here is India and Russia, they are both developing their second BrahMos missile, BrahMos version 2. BrahMos version 1 is a supersonic missile jointly developed. BrahMos version 2 is going to be a hypersonic missile which is going to be jointly developed by Russia and India, right? In addition to that, India is also carrying out its own hypersonic missile testing, so that we don't have to be dependent on Russia also. All right, so that's all. These are all the different different missile related developments that have happened in the last 1 year. All right, so with this we can conclude the discussion. Yeah, there is also a word which I have asked as a question here. The term ski jump has often been used in military defense vocabulary. Where does its utility lie? Right, so it's basically a technique, a technology that is actually used in launching fighter aircrafts out of aircraft carriers. Let me show you some imagery for that. You see, there are different kinds of naval vessels. All right, in India, we have a strategic command over Indian Ocean region. Right, nature has given us that advantage. All Chinese vessels have to come through this narrow opening of Strait of Malacca. All right, and any Chinese vessels can enter into the Indian Ocean region, but they cannot easily exit. We can simply go shut the door here. All the Chinese ships, vessels will be stranded here. Right, and what do we need to block this? We need aircraft carriers. But the problem with aircraft carriers is they don't have any defense systems on their own. Aircraft carriers are considered to be sitting ducks. They have all the fighter aircrafts decked, but they don't have any defense. So if the Chinese ships can have destroyers with them, they can simply break this aircraft carrier. That's why you will never find any aircraft carriers of any country loitering on their own. All aircraft carriers will be supported by destroyers. Okay, this is India's largest destroyer, called as INS Visakhapatnam. Right, so beneath the destroyers you have ships called as frigates. Beneath the frigates you have corvettes. We don't have to go to all that. Right, for the purpose of maintaining India's strategic security in the oceans, we only need aircraft carriers and submarines. Aircraft carriers are for defensive purposes in the context of India, whereas for USA, aircraft carriers can also be used for offensive purposes. They have more aircraft carriers which roams across all waters, all oceans. But in India, we only have one aircraft carrier, right? And that too, it will be only in the Indian Ocean region. So we don't actually need a blue water navy. We are not an aggressive offensive power. We don't want to extend our hard power to other littoral states. For us, the purpose is when the threat comes from Chinese, we are in a position to tackle the threat. And for that, we need 1 or 2 aircraft carrier. We need 1 or 2 submersible, ballistic, nuclear powered submarines. Right? So these are nuclear submarines which are capable of launching ballistic missiles. If we can only have such capabilities, we are more than good. We can safeguard our strategic interests. Right, so when it comes to this aircraft carrier design, okay, so if you look at this is India's own indigenous aircraft carrier, right? So we call it as Vikramaditya, right? It is India's indigenously developed aircraft carrier. We call it as INS Vikramaditya, right? So you look at the top surface, your top board, the deck, look at it, right? It has a curved surface. Why do we have that curved surface? So that aircrafts can take off. So this is one of the mechanisms how aircrafts take off. You see, it just goes and it goes on a ramp, right? It goes on a ramp which is actually inclined at a particular angle. 6 degrees or 7 degrees will be that angle, right? And that ramp, it gives that necessary flight to the aircraft, right? So this mechanism is what is called as ski jump. So in India's own indigenous aircraft carrier, we have ski jump method of launching an aircraft, whereas the system that you find here is basically, this is on board US aircraft carrier. On board a US aircraft carrier, look at the surface, look at there is no ramp, it's a straight deck, right? Then how do they actually fly? It's a result of, because of a catapult, slingshot, right? We would have all used catapult and a sling in our life. We take a stone and we pull an elastic band and we release it, right? Similar mechanism. You see, the wheel of the aircraft is actually pulled by a slingshot, correct? So this system is what is called as catobar. Okay, this is actually used in US aircraft carriers, but when it comes to both Russian as well as Indian aircraft carriers, we actually don't use this catapult mechanism. That requires very complex engineering design for the deck. We use a very simple system, just give an angle, right? And because of that angle itself, the flight will get its required lift, right? So the ski jump is a word that is used in the context of takeoff of a combat aircraft on the ramp of an aircraft carrier. All right. So that's all. We are done with discussing about the defense related developments altogether. So in the first session, we have discussed about combat aircraft development across different generations, and in today's video we have discussed about all the different missile related developments of the last 1 year. Right. So I hope it was helpful, and we'll meet in the next discussion. Thank you.